People like you should be sitting in economy. Miss, this is my ticket. Oh, don't hand it to me. I don't want to touch anything you've touched.
What is she doing here? The voice cut through first class like a blade. Sharp, cold, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Lauren Mitchell didn't even try to lower it. She stood at the front of the cabin, one hand gripping the service cart, eyes locked on the elderly woman slowly stepping past the curtain. The woman paused for a second. Not because she was unsure, because her knee hurt. You could see it in the way she shifted her weight. Careful, measured, every step planned before it happened. First class was quiet, soft lighting, the low hum of the engines, crystal glasses catching reflections from overhead lamps. People here paid for silence, and now all of them were watching. Lauren tilted her head, lips tightening. These seats are reserved for first-class passengers, my mom. Polite words, ugly tone. The woman stopped beside seat 3A. She looked down at the boarding pass in her hand, then back at Lauren. Her voice was calm, soft, steady. This is my seat. Lauren didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even glance at the boarding pass. Instead, she let out a short breath through her nose. A sound just loud enough to carry judgment. Let me see that. The woman extended the paper. Lauren didn't take it. Not right away. There was a pause, a small one, but long enough to make it uncomfortable. Long enough to make everyone watching feel it. Then Lauren leaned back slightly, like the paper itself might carry something unpleasant. Just hold it up. The woman did. Seat 3A, first class, printed clear. Lauren looked at it for less than a second. Then she shrugged, we'll see, 2 words. Dismissive, like a verdict already decided. Behind them, a man in row 4 leaned forward, mid-40s, expensive watch, red face that came easy to irritation. Brian Collins. He glanced at the woman. Up, down, slow. Then over at Lauren. Is she supposed to be sitting here? No one corrected him. Not the couple in row 1 sipping champagne. Not the businessman in row 2 scrolling through his phone. Silence has weight. And in that moment, it leaned in one direction. Lauren's lips curved just enough to suggest agreement. That's what I'm trying to figure out. The woman didn't react, didn't defend herself, didn't raise her voice. She simply reached for the armrest, lowered herself into the seat with care. A small wince passed across her face, gone in a second. Control, that's what it was, not weakness. Control. She placed her hands on her lap, fingers interlaced, breathing even. If you didn't look closely, you'd miss it. The discipline, the kind that takes years to build. Lauren watched her sit. Something in her expression hardened. Not anger, something worse. Certainty, the kind that comes from believing you already know who someone is. She turned away, pushed the cart forward, started service. Row 1 first, a white couple in matching sweaters. Her voice changed instantly, warm, light, almost musical. Welcome aboard. Can I get you some champagne? A laugh followed. Easy, familiar, like they belonged together. Row 2, a man in a navy suit. Lauren leaned in slightly. Whiskey? I remember you like it neat. He smiled. Appreciative. Exactly right. Recognition. Respect. Effort. Then row 3, seat 3A. She didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Didn't look. The cart rolled past like the space was empty. Like the woman sitting there didn't exist. A few seconds passed. Then a minute. The soft clink of ice in glasses. The faint smell of alcohol in the air. Low conversation returning. Cautious at first, then normal again. The woman in seat 3A waited. Not impatient, not confused, just waiting. Patience is a habit. You can tell when someone has practiced it for a lifetime. Finally, she raised her hand. Not high, not demanding. Just enough. Excuse me. Lauren didn't turn. She adjusted napkins in the galley. Rearranged cups that didn't need rearranging. Excuse me, the woman said again, still calm. When you have a moment, may I have a glass of water, please? Lauren sighed, audibly. She walked back into the aisle, arms crossed. What now? The tone had changed again. Not polite, not even pretending. I just like some water. A pause. Then Lauren reached for a plastic cup. Not glass. Plastic. The kind used in economy. She filled it halfway, no ice. Walked over. Set it down harder than necessary. Water spilled. Spread across the tray. Touched the sleeve of the woman's cream blazer. No apology. No eye contact. Nothing. The woman looked down at the stain. For a moment, the cabin felt smaller, tighter, like something important had just happened, and no one wanted to name it. She picked up the cup. Her hand didn't shake. She took a sip, set it back down, and said nothing. That silence did something. It made the moment louder. Brian leaned over again from row 4, smirk forming slowly. Unbelievable, he muttered, loud enough, every flight. Lauren heard him, didn't correct him, didn't need to. She was already moving on. Behind them in row 5, a woman shifted in her seat. Angela Brooks, 40 years old, school teacher. The kind of person who notices things others ignore. Her eyes moved from the plastic cup to the untouched champagne glasses to Lauren's back. Her jaw tightened. Slowly, she reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, tilted it just enough. Press record. No announcement, no warning, just a quiet decision. The red dot blinked once and then again and kept blinking. Up and up in seat 3A, the woman sat still, hands folded again, eyes forward, breathing steady. If you looked at her, really looked, you'd see something under the surface. Not anger, not fear, something older, something built over decades of being underestimated, something that doesn't rush, because it doesn't need to. Lauren thought she had already figured her out. Brian thought the same. Most of the cabin did. They saw an old woman. They saw someone who didn't fit. They saw what they expected to see. What they didn't see was who she really was, and how close they were to making a mistake they would never recover from. The plane hadn't even left the ground yet, but the air inside first class already felt heavier. Margaret Hayes sat still, her back straight against the leather seat, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest. The plastic cup in front of her was half empty now. A thin ring of water clung to the edge where her lips had touched it. She didn't wipe the spill on her sleeve. Not yet. Across the aisle, the businessman in row 2 glanced at her, then quickly looked away. His jaw tightened, like he had something to say but chose not to. He reached for his whiskey instead. It was easier that way. Lauren moved through the cabin again, checking seat belts, adjusting overhead bins that didn't need adjusting. Her movements were sharp, controlled, efficient, but there was something under it, a tension that hadn't been there earlier. She stopped at row 1, leaning in close to the couple again. Everything good here? The husband nodded, smiling, perfect as always. Lauren smiled back, that easy smile, the one she chose who deserved it. Then she turned, her eyes passed over Margaret, paused, just for a second, then moved on, like looking at something she didn't want to acknowledge. Brian leaned back in his seat, stretching his legs into the aisle. He watched Margaret openly now, no effort to hide it. You know, he said, not really to anyone. Airlines used to mean something. No one responded. He chuckled softly to himself. Margaret didn't turn, didn't react, but something in her breathing changed. Slight, measured, in, out, in, out. Years ago in a courtroom in Richmond, she had once listened to a man lie under oath for nearly 2 hours. Calm voice, confident tone. Every word false. She had sat just like this, still, quiet, letting him speak. Because truth doesn't rush, and neither did she. A chime echoed through the cabin, soft, familiar. The captain's voice followed. Ladies and gentlemen, we're preparing for departure. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened. The engines hummed louder now, a low vibration beneath the floor. Margaret reached down slowly, pulled the belt across her lap, clicked it into place. Her hands were steady, always steady. That was something her husband used to say. You don't react, Maggie. You respond. She had carried that with her for decades. Across the aisle, a young woman in her 30s shifted in her seat. She had been watching since boarding, watching everything. Her eyes moved between Lauren, Brian, and Margaret, like she was trying to understand something that didn't make sense. She leaned forward slightly. Excuse me, she said, her voice careful. I think she asked for water a while ago. Lauren stopped mid-step, turned slowly. The smile was gone now. I already handled it. The young woman hesitated. Her fingers tightened around her phone. It just looked like I said I handled it. Short, flat, final. The young woman leaned back, silenced, not convinced, but quiet. That was the pattern. Speak a little, then stop, because pushing further cost something. and most people aren't ready to pay it. Angela, in row 5, adjusted her grip on the phone. The screen reflected the cabin lights. She tilted it slightly, capturing Lauren's face, Brian's posture, Margaret's stillness. She didn't blink, didn't move, just recorded. The plane began to push back from the gate, a slow, steady motion. The outside world drifting away inch by inch. Inside, the distance between people felt much larger. Lauren returned to the galley. She grabbed a stack of napkins, then stopped. Her reflection stared back at her in the metal panel. For a brief second, something flickered across her face. Doubt. Then it was gone, replaced by irritation. She turned back toward the cabin. Margaret reached for her sleeve then, gently pressed the napkin against the damp spot. The fabric had darkened slightly where the water had soaked in. She rubbed it once, stopped, looked at it. It wasn't about the stain. It never was. Brian spoke again, louder this time. Honestly, it's not even about the seat, he said, shaking his head. It's about standards. The word hung there. Standards, heavy, loaded. Margaret turned her head then, slowly, not toward Brian, toward the window. The tarmac stretched out under the morning light. Ground crew moving in practice rhythm. Planes lifting, landing, moving like pieces on a board. Order, system, rules, things she understood, things she had enforced her entire life. Her reflection stared back faintly in the glass. Older now, lines deeper, eyes sharper. She had spent 30 years deciding who told the truth, who lied, who deserved to be heard, and who didn't. She knew bias when she saw it. The subtle kind, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that smiles while it excludes. Behind her, Brian shifted again. You'd think people would know where they belong. That word again. Belong. Lauren didn't stop him, didn't correct him. She was standing just a few feet away, close enough to hear every word, close enough to choose silence. And silence in moments like this is never neutral. Margaret closed her eyes for a second, just one. Her breath slowed, centered. Then she opened them again, calm, controlled. But something had changed. Not on the surface. Deeper, like a line had been crossed. And once a line is crossed, it doesn't disappear. It stays, waiting. Angela zoomed in slightly on her phone. Margaret's face filled the frame now. The stillness, the composure, the kind of quiet that doesn't break under pressure. Angela had seen people get angry. She had seen people cry. This was different. This was restraint. And restraint always has a reason. Up front, Lauren grabbed the intercom, then hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the button. She looked back at row 3, at Margaret, at the seat, at the presence that didn't match the story she had already decided was true. Her jaw tightened. She set the intercom back. Not yet. The plane paused on the runway, engines rising, a deep roar building beneath the silence. Margaret's hand rested lightly on her lap again, fingers still interlaced. But if you look closely, you'd notice the smallest shift. Her thumb moved once, a quiet, unconscious motion, like a signal or a decision forming. The plane surged forward, faster, faster. The cabin pressed back into their seats. And in that moment, as the ground fell away and the city shrank beneath them, no one in first class realized what had just taken off with them. Not just a passenger, not just a story, but a chain of consequences already set in motion. And at the center of it sat a woman they had already underestimated. The seatbelt sign dimmed with a soft chime, and the cabin exhaled. People shifted, reached for drinks, adjusted jackets. The quiet luxury of first class returned, at least on the surface. But not everything had settled. Margaret Hayes opened her eyes slowly. The faint pressure from takeoff had eased, but her knees still ached. A dull, constant reminder that time moves forward whether you are ready or not. She leaned slightly to the side, glancing up toward the overhead bin. Her bag was there. Inside it, a small orange bottle, blood pressure medication. She took it every morning, same time, no exceptions. Her hand moved to the armrest. She pushed herself up carefully. Not fast. Never fast. The kind of movement that comes from knowing exactly how much strength you have and how much you need to save. She stood. For a moment, the cabin tilted in her vision. Just a fraction. She steadied herself with the back of the seat in front of her. Then she reached up. Her fingers brushed the latch, missed. She adjusted her footing. rose slightly onto her toes. The muscles in her calves tightened. Her shoulder lifted. Still not enough. Behind her, Brian watched. Didn't move. Didn't offer. He leaned back instead, arms crossed, observing like it was something to pass the time. Up front, Lawrence saw it. She saw the struggle, the reach, the hesitation. She didn't step forward. She didn't call for help. She just watched. The way someone watches a situation they've already decided doesn't deserve intervention. Margaret tried again. This time her fingers caught the edge of the latch, but she couldn't pull it down fully. Her grip slipped. The bin stayed closed. She exhaled slowly. Not frustration. Control. Always control. Mom. Lauren's voice cut in. Not helpful. Sharp. You're blocking the aisle. I need you to sit down. Margaret turned her head slightly. Her face calm. Voice even. I just need my medication. It's in my bag. Lauren didn't move closer. Didn't soften. You should have taken care of that before for takeoff. A pause. Then colder. Sit down. The words landed flat. No room for discussion. No room for context. Margaret lowered her arm. Slowly. She sat back down. The overhead bin remained closed, 3 feet above her, and completely out of reach. Angela's phone tilted upward just enough to capture the moment. The stretch. The denial. The way Lauren stood still while a 70-year-old woman struggled. Her lips pressed together, hard. She didn't speak. Not yet. A man in row 1 shifted in his seat, looked back briefly, then forward again. He picked up his glass and took a sip. People see more than they admit. They just don't always act on it. Minutes passed. Margaret's hand rested on her lap again. But this time her fingers weren't interlaced. They were slightly apart. Tension. Quiet. Contained. She pressed the call button above her seat. A soft chime echoed. Lauren didn't come. Instead, another flight attendant appeared. Brenda Moore, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back tight. Her movements quieter, less practice, less confident. She stopped beside Margaret.
Yes, Mom?
Margaret looked up at her. My bag. I just need help getting it down. Brenda hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the galley. Lauren was watching. Not openly, but enough. Brenda swallowed, then nodded. Of course. She reached up, pulled the latch, opened the bin, retrieved the bag carefully, and placed it on Margaret's lap. Their eyes met for a second. Something passed between them. Understanding. Shame. The kind that comes when you see something wrong and don't stop it soon enough. Margaret gave a small nod. Thank you. Brenda didn't respond right away. Then quietly, almost under her breath.
You're welcome.
She stepped away quickly, like staying longer might cost her something. From the galley, Lauren's voice carried out. Loud, deliberate. Some people think buying a ticket means they get a personal assistant. A few heads turned. Brian laughed. Short, sharp, must be nice. Margaret unscrewed the bottle, shook 1 pill into her hand, reached for the plastic cup. The water inside had warmed slightly. She swallowed the pill, set the bottle back into her bag, closed it, placed it gently on the floor beside her feet. Her hands rested on her lap again. This time, they trembled, just slightly. Not from weakness, from pressure, years of it, layered, controlled, contained behind walls built slowly over decades. She had seen this before, not in planes, in courtrooms, in offices, in rooms where people decided who mattered and who didn't. She had listened to testimony about discrimination that was subtle, quiet, polite on the surface, but corrosive underneath. And now she was sitting inside it, not as a judge, as the target. Across the aisle, the businessman cleared his throat. He looked at Lauren, then at Margaret. His fingers tapped once against his glass. He opened his mouth, stopped, closed it again. Silence won. Again. Angela adjusted her grip on the phone. Her thumb hovered near the screen. She zoomed in slightly on Margaret's hands. The tremor, small but real. That was the moment something inside her shifted. Not anger, not yet. Resolve. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that records. Up front, Lauren turned away, grabbing trays, preparing for service. Her movements faster now, sharper. She felt it too. Not guilt. Pressure. But instead of stepping back, she leaned in. Harder. Because sometimes when people feel wrong, they don't correct it. They double down. The cart rolled out again. Metal wheels against carpet. Soft. Steady. Inevitable. Margaret looked down at her hands one last time, then lifted her gaze. Forward, eyes steady again. Whatever had shaken her was already under control, but something else had taken its place. Something quieter, stronger, the kind of calm that doesn't come before surrender. It comes before a decision, and once that decision is made, everything after it changes. The meal carts came out with the quiet authority that filled the cabin, metal wheels rolling, trays shifting, the faint scent of warm food drifting forward before anyone saw it. Lauren pushed the cart like she owned the space, like this narrow aisle 30,000 feet above the ground was her domain, and for now it was. She stopped at row 1. Her smile returned, bright, polished, effortless. "We have seared salmon today, or herb-roasted chicken. Both are excellent." The woman in the window seat leaned closer, studying the options. "That sounds wonderful," she said, smiling back. Lauren placed the tray down gently. Real silverware, linen napkin folded just right, a small dish of butter, warm bread wrapped in cloth. Care, precision, respect, everything Margaret had not received. Row 2. Same thing, same tone, same attention. The businessman chuckled as Lauren refilled his glass. "Long morning? I've got you covered," she said softly, her voice almost kind. Then the cart rolled forward. Row 3, Margaret's row. The shift was immediate. The warmth disappeared. Her shoulders squared. Her expression flattened. She stopped the cart, looked directly at Margaret. "Well," she said. A pause. "Bad news." Her voice carried. Not loud, but deliberate. "We're out of meals." Silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that makes people look up. Margaret's eyes moved to the cart. 2 trays sat on the lower shelf, covered. Steam barely escaping from the edges. Visible. Obvious. Still there. Lauren followed her gaze, then nudged the cart slightly, blocking the view. "I can check if there's something left in economy," she added, tilting her head. "No promises. A lie. Clean. Simple. Delivered without hesitation." Margaret didn't point at the trays. Didn't argue. Didn't correct her. She just looked back up. "I'll take whatever is available." Her voice didn't change. That's what made it land. Lauren stared at her for half a second, then turned, pushed the cart away. No apology, no explanation, nothing. Brian leaned forward again. He didn't even bother lowering his voice this time. "That's about right." He shook his head slowly, like something had just been confirmed for him. Margaret said nothing, but her eyes followed the cart as it disappeared into the galley. Angela adjusted her phone, zoomed in slightly, captured the empty space where the meal should have been, captured the full trays rolling away, captured the moment. Because moments like this don't always look dramatic. They look small. That's why they get ignored. Minutes passed, long enough for the rest of the cabin to begin eating. Forks against plates, low conversation. The smell of butter and herbs filling the air. Margaret's tray table remained empty. Then Lauren returned. Slow steps, no rush. In her hand, a small plastic tray. She placed it down in front of Margaret. Hard, a cold sandwich. Edges curled. A bruised apple rolling slightly to one side. A packet of crackers. No napkin, no utensils, no warmth. Best I could do. And she was already turning away. Didn't wait, didn't care. Around them, silverware clinked softly. Glasses lifted. People ate. Margaret looked down at the tray. Her hands rested on either side of it. Still, for a moment, nothing moved. Then she picked up the sandwich, carefully, like it mattered, like dignity was something you carried into even the smallest actions. She took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. Her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. Deeper, darker, older. Brian watched. Smirked, he leaned back again, satisfied. Across the aisle, the businessman shifted in his seat. He looked at Margaret's tray, then at his own, then away. His grip tightened around his fork. He ate anyway, because seeing something wrong is one thing. Doing something about it is another. And most people choose the easier path. Angela's phone moved again, capturing everything, the contrast, the trays, the silence, the complicity. She zoomed in on Margaret's face, waiting, watching, trying to understand. Not weakness, not humiliation, something else. Control, always control. Time passed. Slow, measured. Margaret finished half the sandwich, set it down, her appetite gone, not because of the food, because of the meaning behind it. She wiped her fingers lightly against the edge of the tray. then rested her hands again, breathing steady, eyes forward. Lauren passed by once more. Didn't look at her, didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. You don't belong here, and everyone had heard it. Not just in words, in actions, in silence, in the things that didn't happen. A man in row 1 laughed at something. A woman in row 2 asked for more wine. Life continued, normal, as if nothing had happened. That's how it works, not with loud moments, but quiet ones, repeated, ignored, accepted, until someone decides not to accept it anymore. Margaret reached down slowly, picked up her phone, held it in her hand, didn't unlock it yet, just held it, her thumb resting lightly against the screen. She looked at it for a second, then lifted her gaze. Forward, the cabin, the people, the system that had just revealed itself. Piece by piece, moment by moment, and something settled inside her. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. The kind that comes when you've seen this pattern too many times to mistake it for anything else. Lauren thought this was about a seat. Brian thought this was about status. The rest of the cabin thought this was nothing. They were all wrong, because what had just happened was evidence. And Margaret Hayes had spent her entire life knowing exactly what to do with evidence. Her thumb moved, the screen lit up, and for the first time since boarding, she was no longer just sitting in seat 3A. She was about to act. Margaret did not dial right away. Her thumb rested on the screen, still, waiting, because timing matters. It always had. In court, she never rushed a ruling, never spoke before the room had settled, before every eye was on her, before every voice had stopped. Power is not loud. It is precise. She locked the phone again and placed it gently on her lap. Not yet. The cabin moved on around her. Plates cleared, glasses refilled. Low laughter returned in pockets, careful at first, then more relaxed. People always adjust. That is how discomfort survives. It gets absorbed. Lauren came back down the aisle with a tray of empty glasses. She moved quickly now, efficient, focused on resetting the space. She reached row 3, stopped, looked at Margaret's tray, half a sandwich, apple untouched. For a second, something flickered across her face. Not regret, assessment. Then it hardened again.
You finished?
The question landed flat. Margaret looked up at her. No. Lauren reached forward anyway, picked up the tray, took it before Margaret could respond again. Crumbs shifted. The apple rolled, then disappeared into Lauren's hand. No pause, no courtesy, just removal. Margaret's hands remained where they were. Empty now, the space in front of her clean again. Erased, like the moment had never happened. Brian let out a short laugh. Efficient service, he said, raising his glass slightly. Lauren gave him a quick smile. Always. Angela's grip tightened on her phone. Her jaw set. She had seen enough classrooms to know what this was. It wasn't just rude behavior. It was pattern, repetition, pressure, applied slowly, systematically, until the person on the receiving end either breaks or disappears. She didn't lower the phone, didn't stop recording, because something told her this wasn't over. Not even close. Up front, Lauren leaned into the galley, placing the tray down harder than necessary. The metal clink echoed faintly. Brenda stood there, hands busy but movements slower now. She had seen everything, every step, every choice, and she felt it. That weight in the chest, the one that doesn't go away when you look the other direction. Lauren noticed her hesitation. What? Brenda shook her head quickly. Nothing. Lauren narrowed her eyes. Then keep moving. Sharp. Controlled. Brenda nodded and turned back to the stack of cups, but her hands weren't as steady anymore. Back in seat 3A, Margaret adjusted slightly. Her back straightened again. Her shoulders settled. If you didn't know what to look for, you would think nothing had changed. But something had. The line had already been crossed, and now she was past observation. Past tolerance. She was in evaluation. Her eyes moved once across the cabin. Row 1, comfort, ease, unquestioned belonging. Row 2, discomfort, avoidance, silent awareness. Row 4, confidence, mockery, no consequence. Row 5, Angela, still recording, still watching, still choosing not to look away. Margaret's gaze lingered there for a second, then moved on. She reached for her phone again, unlocked it this time. Her fingers moved with quiet certainty, not fast, not hesitant, deliberate. She opened her contacts, scrolled once, stopped. The name sat there, Thomas Grant. She didn't press it. Not yet. Because one call is never just one call. It is a chain, a sequence. And you have to know exactly when it started. A shadow fell across her seat. Lauren again, standing there, arms crossed. Mom. Margaret looked up. Lauren's expression was different now. Tighter, more aggressive. Your phone needs to stay off during the flight. Margaret glanced at the screen. It is on airplane mode. Lauren didn't look. I said off. The tone was sharper, louder. A few heads turned. Brian leaned slightly into the aisle, listening. Waiting, Margaret held her phone up just enough. Airplane mode is permitted. Lauren's jaw tightened. I'm telling you to turn it off. A pause, short, heavy. Margaret's eyes met hers. Calm, unmoving, and I am telling you it is permitted. The words were soft, but they didn't bend. That was new. Lauren felt it. That shift. From passive to firm, from silent to present. She took a small step closer, lowered her voice. You're starting to make people uncomfortable. Brian leaned forward immediately. Yeah, he added. There's been an issue since boarding. His voice carried, confident, backed by nothing. Margaret didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him. She kept her eyes on Lauren. Who exactly is uncomfortable? Lauren didn't answer that because she didn't have one, so she replaced it with your behavior. The word hung there. Behavior, carefully chosen, broad enough to justify anything. Margaret exhaled slowly, measured, controlled. I have not raised my voice. I have followed every instruction. Lauren's fingers curled slightly at her sides. That's not how it appears. There it was. Not truth. Not fact, perception. And perception in the wrong hands becomes weapon. Angela's camera caught everything. The angle, the tone, the shift. This wasn't service anymore. This was escalation. Margaret's thumb rested lightly against her phone. Ready now. Her voice dropped slightly, quieter, but stronger. Then perhaps the issue is not my behavior. A beat, silence stretched, tight, thin. Lauren's face changed, just a fraction. That line again, crossed. She turned abruptly, walked back to the galley, her steps faster now, sharper, controlled slipping, because something had moved out of her control. And she felt it. Behind her, Brian leaned back slowly, watching. But this time, his expression wasn't as certain, not completely. Because something about the way Margaret spoke didn't match the picture he had built in his head. And when the picture cracks, even slightly, it makes people uneasy. Margaret lowered her gaze to the phone. Her thumb moved. And this time, she pressed the name. The line connected, quiet, unseen, unstoppable. And everything that followed was already in motion. The call connected on the second ring. Margaret lifted the phone slightly, not to her ear, but close enough to speak without drawing attention. Her voice stayed low, even, controlled. Thomas. A pause. Then a man's voice, older, steady, surprised. Margaret? Across the cabin, nothing changed. Glasses still clinked. A woman laughed softly in row one, the illusion of normal held. But in that narrow space between her and the phone, everything shifted. I'm on flight 1134, Margaret says quietly, heading to Atlanta. Another pause. Shorter this time. What's wrong? Margaret didn't look around. She didn't need to. She already knew who was watching and who wasn't. I need you to listen carefully, she said, and I need you to remember every word. Her tone changed, not louder. Sharper. Thomas heard it. Anyone who had ever known her heard it. The shift from patience to decision. I'm listening, he said. Margaret's eyes moved once across the aisle. Brian was still there, leaning back, watching. Confident, still certain of his version of the world. Then her gaze moved forward, Lauren, standing in the galley, watching from a distance now, trying not to make it obvious, failing. Margaret spoke again. A flight attendant named Lauren Mitchell has denied service, withheld assistance, and created a hostile environment toward me since boarding. Each word measured. Clear, precise, no emotion, just fact. Thomas didn't interrupt. He knew better. She has also implied that I do not belong in my assigned seat, Margaret continued, and has now escalated the situation without cause. Silence on the other end. Heavy, processing. I want the airline's legal department notified immediately, Margaret said. Not customer service. Legal. her thumb pressed lightly against the edge of the phone. "And I want someone from corporate waiting at the gate when this plane lands." Another pause. Then Thomas spoke, slower now. "Margaret, what exactly happened?" Margaret exhaled once. "Not frustration. Control. I will provide a full account when I arrive," she said. "For now, I need the response in motion." There it was. The difference. Most people call to complain. Margaret called to initiate. There is a gap between those two things, and once you understand it, everything changes. Thomas didn't hesitate again. "I understand," he said. "I'll take care of it." Margaret nodded slightly. "I know you will." She ended the call. No hesitation, no second thought. The screen went dark. But what had been set in motion was not. Angela lowered her phone just slightly, eyes narrowing. She hadn't heard the words, but she saw the shift, the posture, the stillness. The kind that comes after a decision has already been made. Not before. Margaret placed the phone back on her lap. Her hands rested on it now, lightly, like she was done with it. For the moment. Across the aisle, Brian leaned forward again. He studied her, really studied her this time. Something didn't fit. Not the clothes, not the age, the way she carried herself. Too calm, too steady. People who are out of place don't sit like that. They fidget, they explain, they try to justify themselves. She didn't do any of that, and that unsettled him. He shifted in his seat, adjusted his sleeve, looked away, then back again, trying to reconcile the image in front of him with the story in his head. Up front, Lauren's grip tightened on the edge of the counter. She had seen the phone, seen the call. She didn't hear it, but she didn't need to. She felt it. That shift in control. And it irritated her more than anything else so far, because this was supposed to be simple. A passenger, out of place, handled, contained, but now it wasn't contained anymore. She stepped back into the aisle, walked toward row 3, slower this time, measured. She stopped beside Margaret again. "Who were you calling?" The question came sharp, direct. Margaret didn't look up right away. She adjusted her sleeve slightly, smoothed the fabric where the water had dried. Then she lifted her gaze, calm. "I don't believe that concerns you." Lauren blinked once. That answer was not what she expected. "I need to know," she pressed. "If you're making complaints mid-flight, I am exercising my right to communicate," Margaret said, cutting in. Still quiet, still controlled, but now firm. Lauren's jaw tightened again. Brian leaned closer into the aisle, listening, waiting. Margaret continued. "I have complied with every instruction given to me," she said. "I have not disrupted this cabin." A beat, then softer, "but I have been treated differently." The words landed, not loud, but undeniable. The businessman in row 2 froze mid-motion. Fork halfway to his mouth, he lowered it slowly. For the first time, he didn't look away. Lauren felt the shift, the attention, the scrutiny. It wasn't just Margaret anymore. The room was starting to see, and once people see, they can't unsee. Lauren's voice sharpened. "You're making this into something it's not." Margaret held her gaze, no blink, no movement. "Then it should be easy to explain." Silence, tight, uncomfortable. Lauren didn't answer, because there wasn't one, not a clean one, not one that would hold under pressure. She turned abruptly, walked back toward the galley again, faster now, her control slipping in small, almost invisible ways. Angela raised her phone again, captured the retreat, the shift, the cracks. Because this was no longer just an incident, it was escalation, and escalation always reveals something. Margaret leaned back slightly in her seat, her breathing even again, her hands still. But her eyes were no longer passive. They were watching, tracking, evaluating, the way they had in courtrooms for decades. She'd seen this pattern before. Overconfidence, followed by pressure, followed by collapse. Not always immediate, but inevitable. Because truth doesn't need volume, it needs time. And now Tame was on her side. The engines hummed steadily around them. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Outside, clouds stretched endlessly beneath the wing. Inside, something else was building. Not loud, not visible, but real. And by the time this plane touched the ground, it would no longer be contained in seat 3A. The cabin should have settled after that. It didn't. Something had shifted, not loud, not visible to everyone, but enough. Lauren felt it first. in the way the businessman in row 2 no longer avoided eye contact, in the way Angela didn't lower her phone anymore, in the way Brian stopped talking for a moment. Just a moment, but it was there, and Lauren didn't like it. She moved quickly back into the galley, her steps tighter now. She grabbed a stack of service items, then put them down again. Her hands hovered for a second, unsure. That never happened before. Control was her thing. Routine. Order. But this wasn't following the script. Brenda watched her from the side. Quiet. Careful. Not stepping too close. You okay? Brenda asked softly. Lauren didn't look at her. I'm fine. Short, flat, then sharper.
Just do your job.
Brenda nodded, but she didn't move right away. Her eyes drifted past Lauren, toward row 3, toward Margaret. Still sitting there, still calm. Still not reacting the way Lauren expected. That was the part Brenda couldn't shake. Most people would have said something by now, raised their voice, argued, demanded. Margaret hadn't. And that made everything worse. Because calm doesn't give you anything to push against. Lauren stepped back into the aisle again. This time, she didn't wait. She walked straight to the intercom, picked it up. Her fingers tightened around it. A decision. Quick, reactive, not measured. She pressed the button. Her voice filled the cabin. Captain, this is Mitchell in first class. Every conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. Glasses held still. Even the hum of the engines felt quieter. We have a non-compliant passenger in seat 3A, Lauren continued. She has been disruptive and is refusing crew instructions. The words hit hard. Disruptive. Non-compliant. They carry weight in the air. Different kind of weight. Dangerous. Margaret didn't move. Didn't react. But Angela's hand tightened around her phone. Brian leaned forward again, eyes lighting up slightly. This was what he understood. Escalation. Authority stepping in. He shifted in his seat, eager now. Waiting to be part of it. Up in the cockpit, the captain's voice came through after a short delay. Calm. Professional. Understood. Can you clarify the situation? Lauren didn't hesitate. She has been argumentative since boarding, she said, refusing instructions regarding electronic devices and disrupting service. Not accurate, not even close, but delivered with confidence. And confidence can sound like truth. Margaret's eyes closed for half a second, not in defeat, in recognition. She had heard this before. Different rooms, different people, same tactic. Frame the narrative first, then defend it. The captain responded again. Is there any immediate threat? Lauren glanced at Margaret, paused, then said it. I believe there could be. Silence. Complete. The word of threat changed everything. People shifted in their seats. Subtle, but real. Distance formed. Not physical, emotional. Because once that word enters the space, people don't wait for proof. They protect themselves first. Brian straightened up. There it was. Validation. I've been watching her too, he called out loudly. Something's off. His voice carried across the cabin. Confident. Eager. The businessman in row 2 flinched slightly. He didn't agree. But he didn't speak. Again. Angela's breathing slowed. Deliberate. She adjusted her angle. Captured Brian's face. Lauren's posture. Margaret's stillness. Every piece mattered now. Because this wasn't just unfair anymore. It was dangerous. The captain's voice returned. We'll have security meet the aircraft upon landing. Continue to monitor and document. Lauren exhaled slightly. Relief. Control regained, at least in her mind. Copy that, she said. She hung up the intercom, turned, faced the cabin, and for the first time, she didn't look uncertain. She looked justified, like the decision had already been made. Margaret opened her eyes again, slowly, her breathing unchanged, her hands still resting lightly on her lap. No tension now. None. That part was over. The decision had already been made on her side too, and unlike Lauren's, hers was not reactive. It was deliberate. Angela swallowed hard. Her eyes burned slightly, but she didn't wipe them. Not yet. Not while recording. Because this moment, this exact moment, was the line. Everything before it could be denied, explained away, misunderstood. But this was documented escalation. And there was no coming back from it. Brian leaned closer into the aisle again, his voice lower now, but still loud enough. They should have handled it earlier. Lauren gave a small nod. Agreement. Reinforcement. Two people feeding the same narrative. The rest of the cabin stayed quiet, not neutral, never neutral. Silence chooses a side, it always does. Margaret's gaze moved slowly across the space. Row 1, still pretending nothing was happening. Row 2, watching now, really watching. Row 4, leaning in, too comfortable. Row 5, Angela, still there, still recording, still refusing to look away. Margaret's eyes softened for just a second when they passed her, then returned to neutral. The cabin felt smaller now, tighter, like the air had thickened. No one spoke, no one laughed. The illusion of normal was gone, and in its place, something heavier, something real. Lauren turned back toward the galley, her step steady again, but there was something under it now. Not confidence, not entirely. Something closer to anticipation, because she believed the outcome was already set. Security, removal, resolution. Simple, clean, final. Margaret leaned back slightly into her seat, her head resting against the leather, eyes forward, still, composed, untouched. But inside everything was already moving, not emotionally, systemically, legally, inevitably. Because the moment Lauren used that word, threat, this stopped being a situation and became a case. And Margaret Hayes had never lost a case she decided to take seriously. The word stayed in the air long after it was spoken. Threat. It didn't fade, it settled. Into the seats, into the silence, into the way people now looked at Margaret without looking directly at her. Distance. Careful. Quiet. Immediate. That is how fear works. It doesn't need proof. It needs a label. Margaret didn't move. Her hands still rested on her lap, her breathing slow, even. If anyone expected panic, they didn't get it. If anyone expected anger, they didn't get that either. What they got was stillness, the kind that feels heavier than any reaction. Angela shifted slightly in her seat, adjusting her phone. Her thumb brushed the screen, checking the recording. Still going, every second, every word. She lifted her gaze again. Margaret hadn't changed. That was what unsettled her the most. Not the accusation, the response to it, or lack of one. Up front, Lauren spoke quietly to Brenda, her voice low but sharp. They're meeting us at the gate. Brenda's eyes widened just slightly. You already called it in? Lauren didn't look at her. It's protocol. The word sounded official, but it didn't land that way. Brenda hesitated. Her fingers tightened around a stack of cups. She didn't do anything, she said, almost under her breath. Lauren turned, slow, controlled. Her eyes locked onto Brenda. That's not your call. A pause, heavy, then colder. You want to make it your call? Brenda looked down immediately. No. Then don't. Lauren turned away again. Conversation over, authority reestablished, at least on the surface. But Brenda didn't move right away. Her chest rose once, twice. She glanced back toward row 3, toward Margaret, still sitting there, still alone. And something inside Brenda shifted, not enough to act, but enough to feel it. The weight of choosing not to act, that stays longer. Back in row 4, Brian leaned into the aisle again, his voice lower now, but sharper. They should pull her off before takeoff. He shook his head slowly. Now it's a whole situation. A man in row 2 turned slightly toward him. What exactly did she do? He asked. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just asking. Brian blinked, caught off guard. Well, you saw it, he said. The man didn't nod, didn't agree. I saw a woman ask for water, he replied. Simple, direct. Brian shifted. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Silence. Brian's jaw tightened. He leaned back again, looked forward. Conversation over, but not resolved. That was new. The narrative had a crack now, small, but visible. Angela caught it, zoomed slightly. Not just Margaret anymore. Now the room itself was changing. People were thinking, and thinking leads to questions, and questions breed control. Margaret's gaze remained forward, but she heard everything, every word, every hesitation, every shift. She had spent decades listening to rooms like this, reading them. Not the loud voices, the quiet ones, the ones that almost spoke, the ones that stopped themselves. Those are the ones that matter because they are closest to change. Her fingers moved once against her lap, a small motion, barely visible, but deliberate. Across the aisle, the man in row 2 looked at her again, this time longer, not avoiding, not dismissing, studying, trying to understand, because nothing about her matched the word that had been used. Threat. It didn't fit. And when something doesn't fit, people start to question the person who said it. Up front, Lauren grabbed the intercom again, not to call, just to hold. A habit, a signal control. She glanced back once more. Margaret didn't look away, didn't challenge, just met her gaze, steady, unmoving. Lauren looked first, only a second, but it mattered. She turned away quickly, back to the galley. Brenda watched that too. Every small shift, every moment control slipped and got pulled back. The cabin felt different now. Not loud, not chaotic, but charged, like something was building beneath the surface. Waiting, time stretched. Minutes felt longer. The hum of the engines filled the space between thoughts. Margaret leaned back slightly, closed her eyes, just for a moment, not to escape, to center. Her husband used to say that, when the room gets loud, you go quiet. She had lived by that. Courtrooms, hearings, moments when everything could turn. You don't match chaos, you outlast it. Her eyes opened again, clear, focused. Angela lowered her phone just slightly. Her arm ached, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop, because now this wasn't just about Margaret. It was about truth, captured in real time, unfiltered, undeniable. And once something like that exists, it doesn't disappear. The seatbelt sign flickered briefly, then steadied. A soft chime followed. The captain's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Atlanta. The words landed. Final. Time was closing. The end of the flight. But not the end of this. Not even close. Lauren straightened her uniform, smoothed her hair, adjusted her posture, resetting, preparing. Because she believed what came next would confirm her version of events. Security, removal, closure, clean. Margaret adjusted her sleeve again, the faint stain still there, unchanged. She didn't try to hide it, didn't need to. It was part of the record now. Everything was. She reached for her phone one more time, didn't unlock it, just held it, lightly, as the plane began its slow descent through the clouds, the ground rising, closer, closer, and with every passing second, the space between assumption and consequence was about to collapse. The plane dipped slightly as it cut through a layer of clouds, and the cabin lights brightened just enough to pull everyone back into the moment. Descent, final approach, end of the flight, but not the end of what had started. Lauren moved down the aisle with renewed energy now. Her steps were firm again, controlled, almost confident. She stopped at each row, checking seatbelts, tray tables, window shades, routine, predictable, safe. When she reached row 3, she paused. Margaret was already seated upright, seatbelt fastened, tray table closed, hands resting lightly in her lap. Perfect compliance. There was nothing to correct, and that bothered Lauren more than anything else. I need you to keep your seatbelt fastened, Lauren said anyway. Margaret didn't look up. It is. Lauren stood there a second longer than necessary, searching for something, anything, a mistake, a reason. She didn't find one, so she moved on. Behind her, Brian shifted in his seat again. He glanced toward the front of the cabin, then back at Margaret. Something had changed in him, not completely, but enough. The certainty was gone, replaced by something quieter, unease. He adjusted his watch, cleared his throat, looked away, because doubt is uncomfortable.
And he didn't know what to do with it.
Angela lowered her phone for a moment, her arms stiff, fingers tingling. She flexed them once, then raised the phone again. Still recording. She wasn't going to miss the end, because endings reveal everything. The plane continued its descent, the ground now visible through the windows, roads, buildings, cars moving like slow lines of light. Closer, closer. Margaret looked out briefly. Atlanta. She had been there many times. Courtrooms, speeches, moments that mattered. But this one felt different, not bigger, sharper, more precise, because this wasn't about policy or argument or law in theory. This was about behavior, real, observed, documented, and that kind of truth doesn't need interpretation. The landing gear deployed with a low mechanical thud. The cabin vibrated slightly. People shifted in their seats. Prepared, Lauren straightened her uniform again, smoothed her hair one last time. Her reflection flickered faintly in the metal panel near the galley. Composed, Ready. She believed this would end the way she expected. Security steps in. Passenger removed. Report filed. Case closed. That's how it usually goes. That's what she was used to. But she wasn't the only one who had made a call. Margaret's phone rested quietly in her lap. Dark. Still. But what it had already set in motion was moving faster than the plane itself. The wheels hit the runway. Hard. A jolt ran through the cabin. Engines roared in reverse. The plane slowed, momentum pulling forward, then settling. Silence followed, not complete, but close, the kind that comes after impact. The seatbelt sign remained on. No one stood. No one rushed. They waited. Lauren moved quickly to the front, positioning herself by the door, exactly where she wanted to be. In control. At the center. Brian leaned slightly into the aisle again, watching, anticipating. He wiped his hands against his pants once. Nervous energy. The businessman in row 2 sat still, completely still, eyes forward, waiting. Angela adjusted her grip again. Her thumb hovered near the screen. Still recording. Margaret didn't move, her breathing steady, her posture unchanged. She had already arrived, mentally. The plane taxiing was just logistics. The cabin door opened with a soft mechanical click. A rush of outside air slipped in, cooler, different. And then they appeared. 2 uniformed airport officers stepped onto the plane. Dark uniforms, measured steps, professional expressions. They scanned the cabin once. Quick, trained. Lauren didn't wait. She stepped forward immediately. Relief already in her posture. That's her, she said, pointing toward row 3. Clear, direct, confident. She's been non-compliant and disruptive the entire flight. I need her removed. The words came fast now, stacked, final. The officers moved down the aisle, steady, not rushed, not aggressive, just deliberate. Every eye followed them. Every movement watched. Brian sat up straighter. There it was. The moment. Validation. He looked toward Margaret, waiting to see her reaction. Fear, panic, something. But she didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even shift in her seat. The officers reached row 3, stopped. The first officer looked down at her, paused. His expression changed, subtle, but immediate. His shoulders dropped slightly. His posture softened. He looked closer. Really look. Mom, he said quietly. Margaret lifted her gaze, calm, steady. Yes? The officer hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then asked, Are you Judge Hayes? The cabin froze. Not metaphorically, physically. No one moved. No one breathed. Margaret held his gaze, then nodded once. Yes, I am. The silence that followed was different, heavier, not confusion. Recognition. The second officer stepped forward slightly, looking at her more carefully now. His eyes widened just enough. Respect replaced neutrality. The first officer straightened immediately, removed his hat, held it against his chest. Mom, he said again, his voice lower now. My father worked in the district court. He's mentioned your name more than once. Lauren's smile didn't fade. It collapsed, slowly. Like something losing structure from the inside. Brian blinked once, then again. His mouth opened slightly, closed. Nothing came out. The businessman in row 2 leaned back in his seat, a long breath leaving his chest. Angela's hand trembled for the first time, just slightly, but the camera didn't drop, not for a second, because this was the moment everything turned. And every second of it was being captured. Lauren didn't speak. For the first time since boarding, she had nothing. No script, no tone, no control. Her hand, still slightly raised from pointing, lowered slowly to her side, fingers stiff, shoulders tight. She looked at the officer, then at Margaret, then back again, trying to recalculate, trying to understand what had just shifted. But the room had already moved on without her. The second officer stepped forward, his voice clear now, carrying through the cabin. This is Judge Margaret Hayes, he said. Retired federal judge, 4th Circuit. Each word landed. Heavy, precise, irreversible. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Brian. He sat frozen. His posture collapsed inward slightly. The confidence drained from his face. The certainty gone. His eyes flicked toward Margaret again. But this time, he didn't see what he thought he saw before. He saw someone else entirely. And he knew it. The businessman in row 2 leaned back fully now. His hands rested flat on his thighs. He wasn't pretending anymore. He was watching, really watching. Angela's phone trembled again, just a fraction, but she steadied it, because this was no longer just a moment. This was evidence becoming undeniable. Lauren swallowed, a small movement, but loud in the silence. I didn't know, she said. The words came out thinner than she expected, weaker. Margaret looked at her, calm, unmoved. That was never the point. Her voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen, but it cut through everything else. Lauren blinked, confused. For a second, she didn't understand, because in her mind, identity had always mattered. Status, title, proof. But Margaret wasn't talking about that. She was talking about treatment, respect, baseline human decency, things that don't require credentials. The first officer shifted his stance slightly. "Mom," he said gently, "we were told there was a disturbance." Margaret nodded once. There was. Simple, honest, nothing added, nothing exaggerated. Lauren stepped forward quickly. The officer raised a hand. Not aggressive, but firm. "Mom, I'll need to hear this from her." Lauren stopped, mid-sentence, cut off. And that was new. For the first time since the plane left the gate, her authority didn't land. It didn't carry. It didn't matter. Margaret turned her head slightly toward the officer, her posture unchanged, her tone steady. "I requested water. I was denied service. I asked for assistance retrieving my medication. I was told to sit down." She paused, not for effect, for clarity. "I was then told the lavatory at the front was unavailable and directed to the rear of the aircraft." The businessman in row 2 shifted again. His eyes moved to Lauren, then back to Margaret. He hadn't known that part. Margaret continued, "I complied with every instruction given to me." Another pause, then softer. "I did not raise my voice." Silence. Complete. The officer tooted slowly, taking it in, processing. The second officer glanced toward Lauren, then toward Brenda.
Is that accurate?
Brenda froze, her breath caught. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't speak, because this was the moment, the one where silence becomes a decision, and decisions stay with you. Her eyes flicked to Lauren, then back to the officer, then down at her hands. They were shaking. She swallowed, then spoke. Yes, the word barely above a whisper, but it carried. It was enough. Lauren turned sharply. Brenda. But Brenda didn't look at her this time.
Didn't stop.
She asked for help, Brenda said, louder now. She was polite the entire time. Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. There were meals left on the cart. The cabin held its breath. She wasn't served one. Lauren's face went pale. The second officer's expression hardened, not dramatically, just enough. A shift, the kind that comes when doubt becomes direction. Angela zoomed in again, capturing every word, every reaction, every piece falling into place. Brian leaned back slowly. His hands gripped the armrests now, tight, too tight. He didn't speak. Couldn't, because everything he had said earlier was now hanging in the air, exposed, unprotected. The first officer looked back at Margaret. "Mom, would you be willing to step off the aircraft with us so we can discuss this further?" Margaret held his gaze, then nodded. Yes. She reached down for her bag. Slowly, carefully, the same measured movement she had used all day. No rush, no panic, just control. The officer stepped back slightly, giving her space. Respect, real, not performative. Lauren stood frozen near the front of the cabin, watching, trying to find a way back into the situation. But there wasn't one, not anymore, because the narrative had shifted. And this time, it wasn't hers. Margaret stood straightened slightly, her knees protested, but she didn't show it. She adjusted her blazer once, the faint water stain still visible on the sleeve. Unchanged, unhidden. She didn't try to cover it. She didn't need to. It spoke for itself. As she stepped into the aisle, the space around her changed. People moved, not away, but differently, more aware, more present. The man in row 2 stood slightly to let her pass. "Mom," he said quietly. Just that, nothing more. But it mattered. Margaret nodded once, acknowledging, not lingering. Brian didn't move. He stayed in his seat, eyes forward. But his face had changed, the confidence gone, replaced by something else, something closer to recognition. Too late. Angela lowered her phone slightly as Margaret passed her row. Their eyes met for a brief second. Margaret gave the smallest nod. Gratitude. Understood. Angela's throat tightened, but she kept recording. because the story wasn't over, not even close. As Margaret reached the front of the cabin, Lauren stepped aside, not willingly, but necessarily. Their eyes met one last time. Lauren opened her mouth, closed it, no words left, because whatever she could say now would not change what had already been done. Margaret walked past her, without stopping, without acknowledging, because the moment for that had passed. And what came next would not happen in this cabin. The jet bridge felt colder than the cabin. Air moved differently out here, sharper, cleaner, real. Margaret stepped forward slowly, her shoes making a soft, steady sound against the narrow floor. The two officers walked just slightly ahead of her, not escorting, not restraining, just accompanying. That difference mattered. Behind her, the cabin door remained open, voices low, movement hesitant, people watching without wanting to be seen watching. Lauren stayed near the doorway, frozen. She didn't follow, didn't step forward, because something in her knew this had already moved beyond her reach. Margaret didn't look back. She didn't need to. Everything that mattered was ahead. At the end of the jet bridge, a small group waited. 3 people. One man in a dark suit, older, composed, his posture straight but his face tight with concern. 2 others beside him, younger, carrying leather portfolios, their eyes alert, scanning. They stepped forward the moment they saw her, Margaret. The man's voice was low, controlled, but there was weight behind it. Thomas Grant. He closed the distance quickly, stopping just short of her, as if unsure whether to reach out or hold back. Margaret nodded once. Thomas. No embrace, no dramatics, just acknowledgement. But it carried more than anything louder could. Thomas glanced at the officers. They contacted me, he said quietly. As soon as I heard, I came straight here. Margaret's eyes moved briefly to the 2 people beside him. They're with the legal team, Thomas added, from corporate. The younger woman stepped forward slightly. Miss Hayes, I'm Rebecca Turner, she said, General Counsel for the airline. Her voice was professional, measured, but there was something else under it. Urgency. The man beside her nodded. Daniel Price, External Counsel. Margaret looked at both of them. Calm, observing, not impressed, not intimidated, just assessing. Good, she said simply. The officers stepped back slightly now, their role complete. One of them spoke. Mom, if you need anything further. Margaret shook her head gently. Thank you, you've done enough. Respect again. Given. Earned. The officer nodded once, then turned away. Thomas exhaled slowly.
Not relief.
Something closer to preparation. Walk with me, he said. Margaret nodded. They moved down the corridor together. Slow, deliberate. The legal team followed just behind. Not leading, not interrupting. Listening.
Because this wasn't their moment to speak. It was hers. It was hers.
What happened? Thomas asked quietly. Margaret didn't rush, didn't dramatize. She spoke the way she always had, clear, precise. I was denied service, she said, publicly questioned about my seat, refused assistance, misdirected under false pretenses. She paused, not for effect, for accuracy, and labeled a threat. The word hung there again. Different now, heavier, because now it was being recorded in a different space, a different context. Thomas's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. He let her finish. I complied with every instruction, Margaret continued. At no point did I raise my voice or disrupt the cabin. Rebecca exchanged a quick glance with Daniel, silent, but loaded, because they both understood what this meant. Not just a complaint, exposure, liability, pattern. Thomas nodded slowly. Was there any witness? He asked. Margaret's eyes shifted slightly. Several, she said. One in particular recorded everything. Angela. She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. Rebecca stepped forward slightly. We'll need that footage, she said. Margaret stopped walking, turned. Her gaze settled on Rebecca. Not aggressive, but firm. You will not need to request it, she said. It will find you. Rebecca paused, caught off guard, then nodded. Understood. They resumed walking. Further down the corridor now, away from the gate, away from the noise, into quieter space. Thomas slowed slightly. There's more, he said. Margaret looked at him. He held her gaze. I've already spoken to senior operations, he continued. They're aware. This isn't being handled at a lower level. Margaret didn't react, But she heard it. Escalation, institutional response, not deflection, not delay. Good. Thomas continued. And I want you to know, he said, his voice lower now, this won't be minimized. A beat, not on my watch. Margaret studied him for a second, long enough to measure, to weigh, to decide. Then she nodded, I know, and she did. Because she had chosen who to call. That was never random. That was strategy. They reached a private waiting area near the terminal. Glass walls, soft chairs, quiet, contained. A different kind of room, the kind where decisions get made. Rebecca stepped forward again, opening her portfolio. Miss Hayes, we're going to begin documenting everything immediately, she said. We'll need a full account. Margaret sat down slowly, her knees stiff, her posture still straight. She placed her bag beside her, hands resting lightly on her lap again. Familiar position, controlled, ready. You'll have it, she said. Daniel took out a notepad, pen ready, focused. But Margaret raised a hand slightly. He stopped. Before we begin, she said, her voice calm, but sharper now, more deliberate. I want something clear. Thomas leaned forward slightly, listening. Rebecca stilled. Daniel's pen hovered above the page. Margaret's gaze moved between them. This is not about me. A pause. Silence settled into the room. This is about behavior that happens when no one important is watching. The words landed differently here. Heavier. Because now everyone in the room understood what she meant. She continued. And today, someone was watching Angela. Again, unspoken, but present. Margaret leaned back slightly, her hands still, her breathing even. But most days, she said quietly, there is no camera, silence. No one moved, no one spoke. Because that truth was harder to respond to than anything else she had said. Thomas nodded slowly, not as a businessman, not as a chairman, as someone who understood. Rebecca lowered her gaze briefly. Daniel closed his notebook for a second, not finished, just absorbing. Margaret looked forward, eyes steady, unshaken, because this was never just about a flight, and what came next would make that clear to everyone. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after she finished. Not awkward, not uncertain, just still, the kind of silence that follows something true. Rebecca was the first to move again. She opened her portfolio slowly, more careful now, like the weight of the situation had settled into her hands.
It's Miss
Hayes, she said, her voice steadier but softer than before. We're going to take this step by step. Margaret nodded once. Go ahead. Daniel flipped his notebook open again, pen ready. This time, his posture was different. Not just professional, attentive. Listening, not collecting. Let's start from boarding, he said. Margaret didn't rush. She made a judgment before I sat down, she said. Before I spoke, her eyes stayed forward. She treated others first, deliberately, then ignored me. Daniel wrote quickly, not interrupting. Rebecca watched Margaret closely. Not just the words, the delivery, the control. Was anything said directly at that point? Rebecca asked. Margaret shook her head. Not at first. It didn't need to be. A small pause. Behavior communicates. Rebecca nodded slowly. Yes, it does. Margaret continued. When I asked for water, I was given a plastic cup, placed aggressively. No apology. Daniel's pen moved across the page. And then? He asked. I was questioned about my seat, Margaret said, publicly. Thomas shifted slightly in his chair. His jaw tightened again. Margaret didn't look at him. She didn't need to. I provided my boarding pass, she said. It was examined unnecessarily. Her voice didn't rise, but the weight of the words did. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. Did any other passenger have their boarding pass checked again? No. Clear. Direct. Daniel underlined something in his notes. Rebecca's expression hardened. That's important, she said quietly. Margaret continued. I requested assistance retrieving my medication. I was told to sit down. A pause. My bag was within reach, but I was denied help. Thomas exhaled slowly. His hand moved to his chin.
thinking.
Connecting. Margaret's voice remained steady. I was later told the lavatory in first class was unavailable. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. And was it? Margaret shook her head once. No. Silence again. Heavier now, because the pattern was no longer subtle. It was clear, layered, repeated. Daniel stopped writing for a second, looked up. That's a deliberate misdirection, he said. Rebecca didn't respond, but her eyes said enough. Margaret continued. I was served no meal. Despite availability, that one landed differently. Not because of the food, because of what it represented. Denial, exclusion, intent. Daniel wrote again, faster now. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, just a second, then opened them, focused. And the final escalation, she asked. Margaret's gaze shifted slightly, not away, just deeper. I was labeled a threat. The room held that word again, longer this time, because now it was being documented, not spoken casually, not thrown into the air. Written, recorded, permanent. Thomas leaned forward. Were there any actions on your part that could be interpreted that way? Margaret looked at him, not offended, not defensive, just clear, no. The answer didn't need anything else. Daniel stopped writing completely. His pen hovered, then lowered slowly. He believed her, not because of who she was, because of how she spoke. Truth has a tone, and once you hear it, you recognize it. Rebecca closed her portfolio for a second, then opened it again. Decision made. We're going to need to act quickly, she said. Thomas nodded. I've already alerted senior leadership, he replied. This won't stay internal. Rebecca looked at him. Good. She turned back to Margaret. There will be an investigation, she said. Formal, documented. We will pull crew reports, passenger statements, service logs. Margaret nodded. That's appropriate, but her eyes didn't soften, not yet. However, Rebecca continued, we'll also need your consent to proceed with any external actions. Margaret tilted her head slightly. External?
Civil rights complaint.
Daniel said. Potential federal involvement. There it was. The next layer, not just internal accountability, legal exposure. Margaret didn't hesitate. You'll have it. Rebecca paused just a fraction. Because most people hesitate there. Think, calculate. Margaret didn't. Because she had already done that. Before the call, before the landing, before any of this. Thomas watched her closely. You're certain? He asked quietly. Margaret looked at him. Calm, unshaken. Yes, a beat, then softer. Because this is not isolated. Silence, again. But this time, it wasn't just heavy, it was understood. Rebecca nodded slowly. We've had prior complaints, she admitted. Daniel glanced at her, then back at Margaret, not surprised. Margaret didn't react. She had expected that. Because patterns don't appear once. They repeat until someone stops them. Angela's voice broke the silence. From the doorway, soft but clear. I have the video. All heads turned. She stood there, phone in hand, not hiding, not unsure, just present. Rebecca stood immediately. May we see it? Angela stepped forward slowly, her steps careful, measured. She handed the phone over. Rebecca took it, pressed play. The screen lit up, and suddenly, everything that had been said had a face, a voice, a moment attached to it. Lauren's tone, Brian's words, the plastic cup, the empty tray, the denial, the label, all of it real, unfiltered, undeniable. Daniel leaned in slightly, watching, no longer writing, no longer needing to, because this was the record. Thomas's face changed, not dramatically, but enough, because this wasn't just a problem anymore. It was proof. Rebecca lowered the phone slowly, her voice quiet, but firm. This changes everything. Margaret didn't respond. She didn't need to, because she already knew. The moment Angela pressed record, everything had changed. And now, there was no way back, only forward. And forward was going to be very different for everyone involved. The video ended, but no one spoke right away. The last frame lingered on the screen. Lauren's voice, Brian's posture. Margaret sitting still, composed, unmoved. Then the screen went dark. Rebecca exhaled slowly. Not relief, recognition. This is clear, she said. Her voice had changed. Not softer, sharper, more certain. Daniel nodded once, already flipping his notebook open again. We're past internal review, he said. This is exposure. Thomas didn't sit anymore. He stood near the glass wall, looking out toward the runway. Planes moving in the distance, people walking, everything normal, except this. He turned back. How fast can we move? Rebecca didn't hesitate. Immediately. Margaret watched them, calm, still. She had seen this shift before, the moment when something stops being an issue and becomes a case. Angela stood near the doorway, her phone now lowered at her side. Her hand still felt the echo of holding it so long. She wasn't shaking anymore. Not because it didn't matter, because it did, and she knew it. Rebecca turned toward her. Thank you, she said. Simple, but real. Angela nodded. I just didn't want it to disappear, she said. Margaret's eyes moved to her, softened just slightly. It won't, Margaret replied. That was a promise. Not comfort, not reassurance. Something stronger. Rebecca stepped forward again, shifting her focus back to Margaret. There will be immediate action regarding the crew, she said. Suspension at minimum pending full investigation. Thomas added quietly, and that investigation won't be delayed. Margaret nodded. That's appropriate. But her gaze didn't change. Still steady, still measured. Rebecca noticed. There's more, she said. Margaret waited. Rebecca chose her words carefully. This video, it won't stay private. A pause. It will surface. Daniel looked up briefly. We can manage release timing, he added, but not containment. Angela shifted slightly. She understood what that meant. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was impact. Margaret looked at Rebecca. Good. One word, but it landed. Because she wasn't asking for protection. She was asking for exposure. Thomas studied her for a second. You're certain you want it public? He asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. Yes. A beat. Because this is not about a single flight. Silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was aligned. Everyone in the room understood now. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then we prepare for that, she said. Daniel wrote something down quickly. Media response. Legal positioning. Internal accountability. He looked up again. And federal attention. That part hung in the air. Bigger. Wider. Because once it reached that level, there was no quiet resolution. No internal memo. No controlled narrative. Just truth and consequences. Thomas stepped closer to Margaret, lowered his voice slightly. I'm sorry, he said. Not as a formality. Not as a statement. As something real. Margaret looked at him. And for the first time, there was something in her expression that shifted. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Something older. Something deeper. I know, she said. And she did. Because she had lived long enough to understand something most people don't. Systems don't fail loudly. They fail quietly. Until someone forces them into the light. Rebecca closed her portfolio. Decision made. We'll start formal proceedings today, she said. Documentation, statements, immediate review of prior complaints. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. Prior? Rebecca held her gaze. Yes. A pause, more than one. There it was. Confirmation, not surprise, recognition. Margaret leaned back slightly in her chair, her hands resting again in her lap. That familiar posture. But now it meant something different. Not restraint, resolution. Daniel spoke again. We'll need to pull personnel records, he said. Service logs, complaint history. Thomas added, and oversight. His voice was firmer now. More direct, real oversight. Rebecca nodded. It will be done. Angela stepped back slightly toward the door. Her role here was ending. But what she had done was just beginning. Margaret's gaze followed her for a second, then returned to the room. This is not about punishment, Margaret said quietly. Everyone stilled, because that wasn't what they expected. It's about correction, she continued, her voice steady, clear. So it doesn't happen again. That landed differently, because it shifted the purpose, from reaction to responsibility. Rebecca nodded slowly. We understand. She did, because this wasn't just legal now. It was structural. Thomas looked between them all, then back at Margaret. What do you need? He asked. Margaret considered that for a moment. Not long. Just enough. Consistency, she said. A pause. An accountability that doesn't depend on who is watching. Silence. Deep. Because that was the real standard. Not what happens when someone important is present. What happens when no one is. Daniel closed his notebook. Not because he was finished. Because he understood. The rest would follow. Process. Procedure. But the core was already clear. Margaret stood slowly. Her knees stiff again. But she didn't show it. She adjusted her blazer once. The faint stain still there. Still visible. Still part of the story. She didn't hide it. She carried it. Because some things are not meant to be erased. They are meant to be remembered. She picked up her bag. Looked at Thomas. Then Rebecca. Then Daniel. And finally toward the doorway. Toward the world outside this room. Where everything that had just happened was about to matter. Let's proceed, she said. And this time, No one in the room mistook who was leading. The ballroom lights were warm, but the energy in the room felt sharper than that. 1,500 people sat in quiet rows, dressed in dark suits and soft silk, waiting. The air carried the faint scent of polished wood, perfume, and something else. Expectation. Margaret Hayes stood just behind the curtain, one hand resting lightly on the podium edge. The same blazer, the same faint stain still visible on the sleeve. Unchanged. She hadn't replaced it. She didn't want to, because some marks are not accidents. They are records. On the other side of the curtain, the announcer's voice echoed through the hall. Please welcome Judge Margaret Hayes. The applause started before she stepped forward, loud, immediate, but not explosive, respectful, earned. Margaret walked onto the stage slowly, measured, controlled, every step deliberate. The spotlight caught her just as she reached the podium. The room rose to its feet, not all at once, but steadily, row by row, a standing ovation. She didn't react right away. She let it settle, because she understood something about moments like this. They are not about noise, they are about weight. When the applause softened, she adjusted the microphone slightly, looked out across the room. Hundreds of faces, some proud, some emotional, some still processing what they had seen earlier that day. The video had already spread, faster than anyone expected. Clipped, shared, watched, not because of who she was, because of what happened. Margaret rested her hands lightly on the podium. Then she spoke. I'm not going to tell you about the flight. Her voice was calm, clear, no performance.
Just truth.
A ripple moved through the room, subtle but real. She paused, not for effect, for precision. Because what happened on that plane happens every day. Silence, deep, immediate. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to, in restaurants, in hospitals, in offices, in places where people decide quietly who belongs and who doesn't. Her eyes moved across the room. Not searching, not pleading, just present. And most of the time, she continued, there is no camera. Angela sat near the back of the room, her hands folded now, phone no longer raised. But her eyes never left the stage. Margaret's voice softened slightly. There is no witness willing to speak. A pause. There is only the person experiencing it, and the people choosing not to see it. That landed harder, 'cause it reached beyond the moment, beyond the flight, into something larger. Margaret's fingers rested gently against the edge of the podium, steady. Today was different. Another pause. Today, someone pressed record. Angela lowered her head slightly, not out of shame, out of understanding. Margaret continued, and that changed everything. Her gaze lifted again, stronger now. But the goal is not to wait for cameras. The room stilled further, if that was even possible. The goal is to become the kind of people who act even when no one is recording. Short sentences now, clear, direct, each one landing, one after another. Respect should not depend on status. A beat. Dignity should not require proof. Another beat. And justice should not need an audience. The silence that followed was different, not empty, full, the kind of silence that holds something. Reflection, recognition, responsibility. Margaret exhaled slowly, then stepped back slightly from the microphone. Her tone shifted, softer, but deeper. I have spent my life in courtrooms, she said, listening, evaluating, deciding. Her eyes moved again, across faces, across generations. I have seen what happens when people believe they can act without consequence. A pause. And I have seen what happens when someone decides that behavior will no longer go unchallenged. The room leaned in, not physically, emotionally. Because this was no longer about a story. It was about them. Margaret's hands came together lightly in front of her, composed, grounded. This is not about punishment. She said it again, slower this time, clearer. It is about correction. Her voice held steady, so the next person, the one without a title, without a platform, without someone to call a breath, they are treated with the same respect. No one moved. No one whispered. The weight of that truth settled fully now. Margaret stepped back to the microphone one last time, her voice quiet, but unshakable, because dignity is not something you earn. A pause. It is something you recognize in others. The applause didn't come immediately. It built, slow, then stronger, then overwhelming. not just for her, for what she had said, for what it meant. Angela stood with the rest of the room. Her hands came together slowly at first, then faster, then harder, because she understood now. That pressing record was not the end of her role. It was the beginning. Margaret stepped away from the podium. The applause followed her as she walked off stage, still steady, still composed, still carrying herself the same way she had in seat 3A, because nothing about her had changed, only what people saw, and that is where the real difference lives. Later that night, the video crossed millions of views. People shared it, talked about it, argued over it, learned from it. Some saw injustice, some saw themselves, some saw what they had ignored before. And slowly, quietly, something shifted. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to matter. Margaret sat alone for a moment in a quiet room after the event, her hands resting in her lap again, the same posture, the same stillness, but this time there was something else. Not satisfaction, not victory, peace, because the point had never been to win. It had been to make something visible, and now it was. She stood slowly, adjusted her blazer one last time, the stain still there, still visible, still part of the story. And she walked forward, the same way she always had, steady, certain, unapologetic, because dignity is something you carry every day. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts with 3 simple words in the comments like "stay strong always," or "justice must win," or "never stay silent."